just food for thought.
Yeah, these are sort of rhetorical questions.
I know, right?
Well, I'm interested in that as well. Like,
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Okay.
I think
Build,
we all are.
like what kind of capacity you need to build, and how the government can do
Well, let's get there.
Oh yeah, we've had a bunch of people tell me.
that. How would you know about it?
I think when I was just checking, we were at like at least 50.
There was
And I've been getting a lot. I mean, I feel horrible because I'm checking, but I'm getting a lot of emails of like, can you send the link? I can't get the link. And people are excited.
Maybe silver lining of this whole, coronavirus epidemic is that like all these institutions, like we're gonna figure out our online
Seriously.
stuff.
People
Like,
will
we're gonna
learn
get it
what
right
meetings
finally.
can be emails.
Well,
Moving
that's
forward.
right.
People will learn
That's
what
right.
meetings can be emails.
That's one of, yeah, and just getting all the infrastructure and like in place.
Oh,
Are we good?
Yes.
Hi, everyone, again. So, okay, so anyway, so I just wanted to, I was just talking about DOL's early implementation experiences at a high level and then going to move into some specific examples of changes that we're undertaking. One of the things I wanted to mention is that in the space where there's going to be increasing transparency to the activities and to the evidence building outcomes that come out of the work that we invest in, I think it's also important for those of us that are championing this work to recognize that increasing transparency also means increasing accountability, which also means that there are those that are going to be have some risk aversion to this work. And so I feel like what is helpful for those of us that are introducing these concepts to our agency is to recognize that while there are some spaces where when there's a lot of transparency and accountability related to specific investments, to also recognize that we can balance those with smaller scale activities that involve some experimentation. As Diana mentioned, they included a lot of like key words within the information about the public documents, which is that it's not meant to be incorporating all of the work that you're doing, but instead priority areas and to emphasize significant studies. And so what I think that is valuable for us is to say that when there are those particular activities that sort of elevate so that folks are comfortable with these public communications and accountability, then we elevate those products to that level, but that we also have to engage in experimentation, innovation, to have small scale investments so that we're able to promote the learning cycle in a way that allows us to sort of move ideas up the chain to transparent areas, but that we also are encouraging small level iterative engagements that then can elevate to these larger scale commitments. So I think it's important as we're rolling this out as the implementers to emphasize that we want to have both of these at the same time and recognizing how leaders may be responding to this and wanting to make sure that we're balancing and supporting this culture of learning and not just thinking about this from the compliance aspect. And to that end, I think another thing that's really important is to have, to really firmly communicate about roles and expectations. And when I say, I think there's the roles that are identified in the legislation, but there's also expectations that are implied by this. And for those of us that are in these evidence official roles, to help our agencies, those that are users of the data, users of the information, to communicate what their roles are in this process of learning. And one of the things we have found to be particularly important in that is to reinforce policies around evaluation in particular, because there are those that haven't worked in the evaluation space before, they're not aware of the particular pillars that are involved. And I just wanted to throw this up. This is another part of the requirements of the legislation that the CFO Act agencies establish evaluation policies. This is the policy for the Department of Labor. It's built on 5 principles. For the sake of time, I'm just going to throw these up and then move on, because I wanted to talk about how we are taking advantage of building our administrative data capacity for implementation. But I did just want to mention that an important part of having and creating partnerships with our users is to make sure that everyone is clear from the get-go with your projects about the expectations around the work itself. And for evaluation, it's very clear that we we find the need to revisit these pillars of our policy on a frequent basis. In particular, that all of the work that we do, for example, is independent. That once we have a research question and we engage in those activities, that work is done in an independent manner until its conclusion. And it's important that all the stakeholders are aware of these different rules of engagement depending on the type of evidence-building activity you're undertaking, because there are different rules when you're thinking about data analytics, evaluation work, statistical activity. So I think as we're trying to, socialize our stakeholders around these different types of activities, that it's clear what those rules are. So I wanted to move into describing sort of opportunities that we're taking advantage of. At the Labor Department, one of the key, I think, incredible opportunities on the horizon that the Evidence Act is helping to facilitate is to increase our capacity to use our administrative data to improve programs and operations. I think that at the present moment there are a number of, that we're sort of at this confluence of a number of, I think, great environmental factors that sort of really support this idea of coming up with new and better ways to take advantage of our existing administrative data. There's the establishment of the Chief Data Officer. That's new for the Labor Department, and I know for a lot of the other agencies. There's also our department established a data governance body. There's the fact that the agencies have tight margins with their time and people resources. I know that there's challenges with having with needing information faster and cheaper, and so one of the ways you can do that is by maximizing your administrative data resources. And I put this up as sort of like, these are sort of aspirational bullets for us, that these are the things that we're searching for, is to come up with ways to be able to create opportunities to work across, what I put in here is, I said, to support interaction across the hierarchy. And what I mean by that is that often when requirements come down from legislation, the top level decides how that particular agency is going to implement that particular requirement. Well, one of the things we're trying to do is to create a democratized space for data access, because there can be needs to answer high-level mission-driven questions that the leadership determines, but there's also, if we're trying to also support the iterative development, experimentation, we have to create environments that all users can intersect with, and that ideas can come from the top and from all different levels within an organizational structure. And so one of the ways we are trying to do this in the Labor Department is to bring easier access and to facilitate the ability to create use spaces for our administrative data. And so what we're doing, this is a simple graphic to describe this tool that we've been working on. So my office and the Chief Evaluation Office, we have a small data analytics unit, and our data analytics unit 5 years ago experimented with a pilot, what we'll call a data analytics platform. And what I mean by this, because I'm sure with this audience being very technical, I can kind of spit some of this information out that you would find to be useful, that it's a server-based clustered file system. It's for managing, analyzing, merging, visualizing data. We essentially have what I would call this a series of containers. These secure containers have a place where we can co-locate analytic tools. We have Stata, SAS, R, Python, Julia, and it provides massive data storage. In this clustered file system, we have a way that you can visualize data if you need for various leadership. There are various tools, and there's free access to this array of software. And we piloted this. This is why it's in white, is that our data analytics group piloted this because we needed a place to be able to store and analyze and merge some sensitive data. This question emerged 5 years ago, before the Evidence Act. We needed to do this for our evaluation work. And as time has progressed, we've realized that this particular solution for this one problem actually has an ability to solve a variety of enterprise issues and solutions. And so this particular pilot is something that during fiscal year 2020 and into 2021, we will be expanding to be an enterprise solution for the department. And something I think that's really interesting just to emphasize is the importance of these platform tools as requiring and leveraging the expertise of various kind of segments that are all related and interconnected, but yet typically don't necessarily have a space and a platform to work in a very integrated manner. And so we're finding that while our data analytics group developed this tool to help solve a data analytics challenge, that a solution necessarily requires that that our IT, our Chief Information Officer, and our data governance, our Chief Data Officer, also play a critical role in the rollout of this product. And I think one of the key things I feel that the Evidence Act has really emphasized is this integration of these different sort of lanes of expertise to be able to solve problems that we all are seeking to solve, but sort of need to leverage and capitalize on each other's specific strengths. So what I would say, for example, with our platform, the IT group is helping to develop the IT governance to help to make sure that we have a modernized infrastructure to help support fast processing, to move this particular the server cluster file from the servers to the cloud. So we're developing a cloud migration, IT's handling that. Data governance is necessary to ensure that the data standards and data quality practices are in place, that we have data that are getting captured in a way that's fit for multiple purposes. And then the data analytics, which is the group that's helping to create the insights from the data to help with figuring out the sandboxing capabilities that we need. And then, of course, I've left some boxes blank, and these are for our policy folks, those that are coming from different kind of user spaces. We have data security professionals. There's, this is something that we're just starting right now and identifying that our IT, our data governance, and data analytics are the three kind of communities that we're bringing together to form the initial launch for this, but we're recognizing that we need to bring in many different types of personnel into this to ensure that this meets all of the data security, data confidentiality, and then also all of the use cases that are potentially necessary within the department, as well as to be able to develop access points for external users as well. I mean, we're looking for this to be a solution for a variety of data to create many different kinds of insights from our data for many different evidence building activities. So I wanted to share this. It's still in early stages, and I'm hopeful that in a year, hopefully we'll be able to come to this group and share with you sort of this grand new product that we have final, or at least in a more advanced state than it is even now. Jeff, did you want to ask?
Great. Yeah, let me lead off with one question. Then I know we've had a bunch of questions from the online audience. So this question has two parts. One, I'm thrilled to hear that these learning agendas are part of a strategic plan, and they kind of define what are the key questions that we might want data to help answer. And I suspect, of course, a lot of the key questions come from within the agency, but I'm wondering, just in the context of the Department of Labor, I'm part of a company, we're trying to hire. We might say, hey, you know what, we need some employees with these sorts of characteristics. Can a private entity help provide input to these learning plans? So that's one part of the question. The other part of the question is it's nice always to try and balance that demand for data with the supply of what data is being gathered. And then maybe to say, you know what, some of the data we've gathered over a period of time, nobody's really using it. Maybe there's no demand for that particular set of data. Is there a mechanism to kind of stop gathering data that's not really used so that we can kind of focus our energy and our resources on the data that's most valuable and that meets the demand?
Those are great questions. So what I would offer is that, to Diana's point about the Evidence Act requiring stakeholder engagement, not only at one particular point in time, but across the life cycle of the learning process. So stakeholders are expected to provide feedback at the planning stages, at the execution stage, and then at the sort of the results, and then feeding that back into continuous learning. I would also offer that that we are in the early stages of implementation, so it isn't totally clear exactly how all of the agencies will be responsive to this mandate, but this is there, and I encourage everyone to remind any of their points of contact about this, because it is true, this is part of the legislative requirement. And so I think we're always looking for opportunities to be able to meet the spirit of that requirement. And so if there's recommendations for places that would be useful for us to help disseminate our plans or information, we're always interested to hear that. I think it's something that is TBD in terms of how that will roll out over the forthcoming year or so, but it will happen across particularly the 24 CFO agencies that are required to do this.
Yeah, and I guess to your second point about data being gathered that's not being used.
Sunset.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Like there are mechanisms for this. Again, it depends on a particular agency and their particular requirements and their particular processes, but this should all be part of this new data governance activity. So part of what the data governance body should be doing is looking across the agency at the enterprise and saying, what data do we have? What data do we need? What data do we have that we don't need? And what can we do about it? But it's bringing the right people together and doing this in a systematic way. That I think is the innovation here that's not currently happening in a lot of places, but that clearly there is a need.
Excellent. All right. From our live stream audience, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to hear me. Okay, good. So this first question was for Diana. Where can we find the new policy that is dropping today?
Yeah, so I say today that is my hope. So all of OMB policies are posted on the OMB website. It's an OMB memorandum. So I don't have a particular link for you at this moment, but it will be easily available.
As a convenience for everybody who's participating today, we can provide the link to the Summary of the Evidence Act, OMB guidance as soon as it's issued,
Yep.
perhaps a link to your DOL evaluation policy, which I thought was interesting and kind of maybe people didn't catch. So we can provide those links
Sure.
and any others you would like to suggest.
So I would also point folks to the guidance that we released in July, which is M1923. We can provide the link for that as well.
All right. Our next question was, what approach is being taken to raise overall government awareness of everyone's responsibility in the data process? Data is not just a set of information, but all of the processes that are led to the gathering of that information. How do people at all levels in the chain understand their role in ensuring clean and accurate data for evaluation purposes?
So I'll just do a very general answer, then maybe I'll pass to Christina for some specifics. So I think the federal data strategy is a key part of this. So by elevating the importance of leveraging data as a strategic asset into the president's management agenda, I mean, that is a very strong signal that we think this is really important. And I think that the data strategy lays out a set of principles and practices as well as an action plan that all agencies are responsible for undertaking. So a lot of the specifics, what you just mentioned, are addressed in the federal data strategy, but again, I think it's this real recognition and focus on data and federal data and this centrality of it in the work that we all do, that I think is extremely important. And I'll just maybe pass to Christina for your take.
Sure. I think one of the key aspects of this is to identify a specific problem that you seek to solve, because you can get leaders to have buy-in and to provide personnel and support for this work if you explain kind of a future space that they want to be in and what needs to happen to get there. So what I could offer as an example with this is that often, for example, we'll receive data, and the purpose behind that is to receive data related to collecting performance information, and that data is to come in and isn't expected to then be merged with other data. Now, if you had a question that needed to be solved by merging those data, you have to back out of that to see, are those data fit for that purpose? Is that data quality high? Are the metadata included so that we're aware of the fact that these data have this statutory allowance to be able to be used in these different ways? So I think often it's helpful to start by asking a question that you're seeking to solve, and then from there generates, I think, generalizable insights that can be applied across the board. But it's hard when you start with kind of the abstract and then are trying to get folks to buy in when there isn't a clear connection to how this will be useful to them. And so I think it's always helpful to start with use cases.
So I'd like to ask, I'm hearing kind of partly from the audience and also partly from you that this is a culture change. People may not always be using data today to make decisions, and maybe there are some kind of key times when they should stop and ask themselves, do I need data? And at the same time, there's some uncertainty about roles. And so my thought was, There's a Federal Acquisition Institute to go and learn about a curriculum about how to do procurement well. Is there going to be a Federal Data Institute? Perhaps I should put in a plug from REI's perspective. Johns Hopkins has a great program. Should people just turn to Johns Hopkins to learn about new roles and about data culture?
So this is a very important point, and it is being addressed in the federal government in a number of ways. So there is some work going on an upskilling pilot for data analysts, for example. So that is currently happening to figure out how we can upskill some of our current employees to have the skills we need to be effective data users and managers. So that is happening.
If someone online wanted to join that, is that possible? How might they learn how?
So I don't have the link right available for me.
Sure.
We'd be happy to find that information and send it out. But this is something the government is very well aware of. Doesn't preclude the need for outside training. Of course, there are lots of partners that provide really valuable training. I think there's also a recognition that employees across the spectrum need to be data literate, right? This is not just a particular job category, but this is now touching more and more of the work that many people do. And so this focus on data literacy across the board is an important component. And again, sort of going back to the federal data strategy, assessing the data literacy of your workforce is one of the things that agencies are now undertaking.
And in that same vein, someone asked, thanks for raising the issue of change. Have you seen a shift in how senior policymakers are using evidence for decision making? And do you think the Evidence Act has changed how decisions are made?
So I think it's very early. The law it's been a year, and I think it's probably too early to see major shifts. I think that this has certainly got the attention of a lot of people. We're very encouraged by what we're seeing so far. I'm very encouraged by the way that agencies are embracing this work. Agencies that traditionally have not had a really strong evidence building culture are seizing this as a great opportunity. To me, that's really encouraging. It doesn't say there's room for improvement everywhere, but I think particularly for me to see it taking hold in some of these agencies where this has not been a core part of their work, the way they're embracing it, the way we're seeing folks work together is, I think, a very good start.
Very similar. So the legislation and how OMB is implementing is certainly important. However, more critical in my mind is reskilling, upskilling key parts of the federal workforce who do not have the professional and or exposure to data science and analytic concepts of the practical application of these concepts. What will OMB do in terms of providing guidance, a framework, or something to federal agencies about this training need? And of course, how will funding of the training work in the days of Johns Hopkins?
So I'm going to punt on some of this some piece of this question. I think I'm actually at liberty to answer anything about the budget in this forum. But I again will say that this is recognized as a need. The federal data strategy does address this head on in the year one action plan. So that's something I would direct folks to. Again, we can give you the link for that one if you're interested. I will say also that we are doing our best to offer trainings, to offer workshops for federal employees, and we have a series going right now for federal employees on evidence and evaluation. We have a number of different trainings that are offered through the 3 councils that I talked about, so we're doing our best to provide opportunities as we can. I don't know if you have anything from your particular perspective on upskilling.
I think what I reflect on a lot is the fact that each of us comes from a trained discipline, regardless of whatever discipline you come from, you realize that you have to constantly be in a learning mode. Because I come from an evaluation background, and I've spent all of this time now trying to figure out what these containerizations mean and figuring out, data infrastructure. Because to answer the things that I am interested in, I have to know about these other disciplines, and I think you naturally are, I think, also needing to have like a a multi-step approach to this. Some of this is about formally training people in specific disciplines, but also creating networks and opportunities that they can have experiential practices that help them bridge in a practical way, in a pragmatic way, with these other disciplines. Because where I see the greatest innovation happening is when you're looking at people who are coming at this from their multidisciplinary angles and finding these threads and bridges to be able to leverage across their different strengths. And that is where I see this being really critical. So I feel like one specific type of training, yes, it's helpful, but what's really critical is creating these networks and spaces so that people can work together and share on a routine basis their expertise together.
Yes, I love the idea that there's a kind of a clear demand in the strategy for what data do we need and what decisions do we need to make. What I wonder is, as that goes strongly forward within agencies, how they may collaborate across. And I want to offer a specific example of something where I think that's a fantastic use in the past of that cross collaboration. It's collegescorecard.ed.gov. And essentially, it's a combination of information about what college a student graduated from based on their application for aid and what year they graduated. And then 10 years later, there's a combination of that data from the Department of Education with data from the Internal Revenue Service that says, what's their salary or what's their declared income on their income taxes. And of course, after matching it up with the Social Security number, that allows you to say, well, what's the earnings of students at any given college? And then, of course, the identifying information, the Social Security number, is stripped out. And it allows you to say, well, how valuable is a degree at one college or another? What are the earning prospects of one type of degree versus another? And in that sense, I have a kid in college, and I'm very interested in that, but that couldn't come about with just one agency's effort. Department of Ed could not do that alone, nor, frankly, could the IRS do it alone. So my question is, how can we find opportunities for this kind of cross-agency data sharing? And then maybe how do we overcome some of the hurdles to kind of cross-agency data sharing? Any perspective on that?
Yeah, so this is something we've been talking about basically since the law was passed. It's very much on our mind as well. We want to capitalize on this kind of data sharing across agencies, and in fact, that's what Title III, a big part of Title III of the Act, is designed to do, is to, again, facilitate better data access for agencies to share with each other as well as with external parties. There are a number of things that we're considering at this point. So I think sharing the learning agendas is a great first step. Having agencies talk about what those priority questions are, figure out where there are shared goals is one. There are some mechanisms being put in place through the President's Management Agenda and other structures to elevate these government-wide kinds of questions so that we, again, are surfacing the kinds of questions that can only be answered by not only just merging data, but by thinking about the perspective that each of these agencies bring to the table. So this is, you make a great point. It's something we're very much focused on, and we're hearing a lot of demand from the agencies themselves to do this kind of sharing. So they are starting to talk to each other already and figure out where there are common purposes.
So our audience online shouldn't just look at their own agency's learning agenda and demand for data. They should look at other agencies as well to get some ideas.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's where the transparency element is going to be huge. We're going to be able to see each other's questions and talk about it more freely with each other, as well as hopefully have structures and infrastructure in place so that when it comes time to sharing the data we need to answer these questions, some of those barriers will be removed. I don't think it's a lack of will or a lack of desire. I think it's just there are processes in place that make this more challenging than it needs to be. We want to break down some of those barriers.
So we have two more questions that have come in. Do you think we have time for both, or should I pick my favorite of the two?
We'll try to do what we can.
We'll roll through them. All right, so Eric asked first, what implications does the Act have for IT platforms with respect to interagency collaboration, data warehousing, and public transparency? Does max.gov become more or less important? And finally, do any particular cloud services offer useful capabilities?
So I am definitely not the IT expert. I probably am not the best one to answer this question. Quite honestly, although I will say that Max and platforms like it are incredibly important, and thinking about what the next generation looks like is, something that we're giving a lot of thought to.
I would also offer that I think we have a great opportunity right now in terms of thinking about culture, in terms of motivating culture change, not only around the use of evidence, but also in appreciating that we can protect the security of personally identifiable information in a manner that still allows us to be able to learn and help and support the American public with the resources that we've been that has been entrusted with us to help improve programs and policies. And I think we can do both. And I feel like in the past it had been that there was a tension between privacy and confidentiality and being able to use that information to improve programs and policies. And I think, with the sophistication, and it's, not only is it more sophisticated, but it's also cheaper to be able to have very safe data exchanges in a way that does not jeopardize privacy and security for individuals. And so I think this is something that also I think the Evidence Act is coming at a timely point, because there is this change, and this is also part of the culture change, is to be able to communicate that.
All right, last question.
Okay.
Thanks so much for the presentation. Very interesting to hear about the Evidence Act and imagine the change it could accomplish. As the speakers noted, legislation like this carries the risk of becoming a bureaucratic exercise rather than a cultural shift towards data-driven policymaking that it needs to be. What does success look like to you? How would policy development and implementation look different? How would the operations of agency look different? How do we know we're making progress towards this goal?
So there's a lot in there.
Yeah, pick your favorite of the four.
So I will say for me, what I would like to see happen is that evidence has a seat at the table when decisions are being made. So I think we recognize that there are a lot of different factors that feed into decisions, whether that's an operational decision, a policy decision. But what I want to see happen is that evidence has a seat at the table, that it is part of the decision-making process, whether that's a small decision or a big decision, and that the evidence is coming in a timely way, and that it's being produced in a way that's high quality, and then it's communicated to decision makers in a way that they can actually use the information. So we haven't talked a lot about that piece, but that's the critical last step. It's not enough to just put it out there, but you have to have the skills to then communicate it in a way that the decision maker can use the information.
Well, I want to thank our speakers so much. I think it's a perfect note to end on. I want to remind everyone watching that our next event